Thank you very much. Thanks to Bapsa, to especially Pramod and the team for inviting us here on this very, I would say, very special occasion. More so, it's a kind of very sentimental kind of day for me. For many of us, because I remember that it was almost this time that we were around that Rajghat, and we saw Kanshiram being given funeral. So that it was almost this time in 2006, and many of us who were in Delhi, they were there, and that's really an emotional kind of remembrance for me. And not only that, in fact, I happened to by chance meet him many times, and each time one can say that one learnt a lot from the person. When we remember Kanshiram Sahab, I think that's what Chandraya has said, that there are different ways of remembering him. And certainly one of the way is to read his literature around him, and also organize this kind of meetings. And remembrance is something, I think, which is actually just not for the sake of remembrance, but also it's for the inspiration. If the remembrance does not have an inspiration, then actually that remembrance has no meaning. So how do we get inspired from the person like Kanshiram in the present context? You see around how things are happening, the way social, political, cultural, even the economic perspectives are being created. And talking about Kanshiram in this context, I think is something which needs to be contextualized. Because you see that he started somewhere in 70s, and if you look at that 56, Dr. Ambedkar left, and almost after 40 years there was another kind of emergence of a person. And I was just thinking that how do we look at the next 40 years up after him? Because 20 years almost are going to be over. In next 2 years, it will be 20 years when Kanshiram Sahab left us. And the kind of leadership which was created in those 40 years, that kind of leadership probably does not look like. And that's where actually his role, his idea needs to be contextualized. When we look at it's many a times people have called him an enigma also, Indian politics enigma. why he was considered to be an enigma? Because the kind of atmosphere, the kind of cadre that Chandriya was talking about was created by him. Actually, if we compare that with Dr. Ambedkar, then that kind of cadre Dr. Ambedkar also could not create. It's not to criticize Baba Sahib, but it is to understand that how things were happening. When we look at Dr. Ambedkar's struggle, he had his own times, he had his own circumstances. And when we look at Manyawar Kanshiram Sahib, then he had his own context, he has his own circumstances. And when we look at Dr. Ambedkar, then he fought for separate electorates in the given circumstances, because he knew that it would be difficult to bring these marginalized sections of the society together, because that was not the time. That's why the time was a different, because that time untouchability, more so the physical untouchability, was so prevalent. But when Kanshiram Sahib comes, then the kind of untouchability which was there 40 years back, 50, 60 years back, that was not there. So now, instead of going for separate electorates, somebody asked him, Kanshiram Sahib, that why don't you fight for separate electorates? Dr. Ambedkar fought for separate electorates. He wanted separate electorates. And you see, what was his response? His response was that when the rulers were Britishers, that time Dr. Ambedkar kind of personality could not succeed to get the separate electorates. Now, when the Indians themselves are there, then I think it's futile exercise to waste my energy for separate electorates. So you see how ideal and pragmatic. Because if you look at Dr. Ambedkar also, then you would see that he was both idealist as well as pragmatic. He knew what to do when. And probably Kanshiram was also of the same kind, wherein he knew that in these circumstances, when the Britishers were in a way a kind of buffer zone between the caste Hindus and the Dalits, then the separate electorate could not be realized. Now, asking the caste Hindu rulers separate electorate would not be feasible at all. So, what comes in? He realizes that something else needs to be done. And I think that's where he picked up, and then he comes out with this idea of Bahujan. He came out with that idea which was known as BAMSIF, Backward and Minority Communities Employees Federation. But when he further went to the history, then he realized that there was a concept called Bahujan, wherein all the marginalized sections of the society who are the sufferers of casteism. They can be brought in. And I think that's where we need to understand that how he brought in the idea of Bahujan. And Bahujan definitely is not just number, as Chandraya was saying. It is number. Number is just to tell the common masses that you are so much in numbers, so you need not to be afraid of. But behind that Bahujan, there was a whole lot of philosophy. And that is what Kanshiram was trying to realize. Then, when we look at his anti-caste, we say that he was leading an anti-caste movement. But he was also consolidating caste. How do we understand this? On the one hand, a person is saying that I am going for anti-caste. We want to have a casteless society. But at the same time, he is also going for consolidation of castes, different small castes. Because he knew that without consolidation of these different castes, the ideal cannot be realized. And that's where actually he tries to conceptualize this in terms of Bahujan, wherein all the sufferers of caste would be coming together. And this consolidation of caste was a kind of process that was not the kind of final solution, but he was looking at the process through which the caste consolidation would result into the anti-caste. For that, you know what he used to say? People used to ask him, journalists would ask, कि आप तो ये बात करते हैं, लेकिन आप तो ये काम कर रहे हैं. तो then he would say कि मैं ये जो एक धारी तलवार है कास्ट की, मैं उसको दो धारी तलवार बना रहा हूं, ताकि जो चलाने वाला है वो ये सोचे कि अगर मैं इसको दूसरे पे चलाऊंगा तो it can also harm me back. So that was the kind of idea with which Kanshiram was working. And see, every history or every let's say movement has its own processes, and I think that was the kind of process through which Kanshiram Sahib was working. Now you see that there are different kinds of organizations coming up in the name of caste, and now it is hampering the larger movement. You see, it is happening in different parts of the country. Small caste groups are emerging, and they are claiming their own selfish kind of identities and saying that we also need our own share. That is one aspect, is that why not? Why everybody should not be having the share? But what Kanshiram was doing is, he was saying that we have to come together not for individual communities, for the interest of individual communities of the marginalized sections, but for the larger interest. And that's where he formed this alliance with Mulayam Singh. Because you know that the reality is that there are different kinds of organizations, there are different kinds of communities which have their own kind of understanding. But here in I think Kanshiram was also knowing that without having any alliance with the other political parties which are representing other marginalized sections of the society, it won't be possible. So that idea also was a kind of pragmatic idea. There were lot of differences. See, the kind of ideological orientation that Kanshiram had, that ideological orientation was not available in Mulayam Singh Yadav. That's why they were operating in different ways. Mulayam Singh was using more of a Samajwadi kind of idea, whereas Kanshiram was going to the basics, to the fundamentals. He was not lost somewhere in between. And that's where actually the difference between these two ideologies can also be seen. What is happening today can be a different kind of story. But when you look at the ideological orientation, then I think there was something which was different in Kanshiram, and the kind of long-term vision that Kanshiram had, probably that was not there in other leaders of his times. That's why they could not learn from him. They went to in their own kind of politics. But Kanshiram was someone who was not just doing the politics. He was also leading the social movement. So these two things were going simultaneously. And that's where this idea of जिसकी जितनी संख्या भारी उसकी उतनी हिस्सेदारी, and there were different kinds of slogans, and there were some kinds of slogans, because in, you see, 92 there is this demolition of the Babri Mosque, and immediately 93 these two people, Kanshiram and Mulayam, they formed the government. See that, how could that happen? Could that happen just because there was actually no understanding? There was an understanding. One cadre was completely understanding this very well, that this is the process through which it has to be done. And that's where their combination could succeed to that extent, that wherein there was a hype of the Kamandal and the kind of Bahujan, not only, I would not say Mandal, but also I would say Bahujan, which emerges. Mandal obviously is part of that. So now Chandriya was talking about the conceptual categories, and it's true. I think as an academic I should also accept this, that we certainly have not been able to conceptualize and come out with the kind of categories which probably we should have come out by now, because it has been almost now 30 years the Bahujan movement was going on. So during this period, I think the problem, I think, with the academy is also that we are also trained in a different manner. The previous generation to us was trained in a completely different kind of manner. The generation that I belong to, or maybe Chandraya is younger to me. So this generation actually is the almost a first kind of generation coming into academics. So limitations there are so many limitations, and despite those limitations, there have been people, those who were raising their voice. But certainly I would say that this conceptualization is something which needs to be taken care of. And some of the things like Kanshiram was used to say that हमें मजबूत सरकार नहीं, हमें मजबूर सरकार चाहिए. So how do you conceptualize this? That the marginalized sections of the society don't need a majboot sarkar. Because if you look at the history of democracy in this country, then you would see that whenever there was a majboor sarkar, that majboor sarkar only worked for the benefit of the marginalized sections. A majboor sarkar never worked for the marginalized sections of the society. There can be a lot of hype, there can be rhetorics, but there has not been the kind of policies which could have been made by any, I would say, which is known as a Majboot Sarkar. That's where I think this understanding that how do you, like democracy. In democracy, what is important? Is it important that the government should be strong, or is it the people should be strong? Whether institutions should be strong or the people should be strong. And I think it is in this context I think we need to understand, or maybe some of you might get some idea to how do we conceptualize this in a democracy. Though people would say that no, we need a very strong government in a democracy, because otherwise how would the democracy survive? But democracy has been surviving in this country, and I think it will survive. Despite all these different kinds of problems, the democracy has been surviving. In 50s, 60s, the Westerns used to say that democracy will not survive in this country, but it has survived. But the only problem is that it is only the procedural democracy which is surviving. How do we make it a substantive democracy? How do we make it answerable to the people? And with that, I would say that Kanshiram also used to say कि जैसी जनता नेता डिजर्व करती है वैसे नेता उनको मिल जाते हैं. तो this also is something very different, because he would say that it's not the neta who would decide, it is the people who should decide. When the neta would start deciding, then he will not listen to the people. And when the people will decide, then only the neta will listen. So, in a democracy, when we say democracy, we don't say neta shahi. We say lok shahi. We say lok tantra. We don't say neta tantra. But it becomes a neta tantra. So how do we do away with that kind of situation? So I think that is for which Kanshiram Sahab introduced these cadre camps. And with the passage of time, as the party became strong, then the cadre camps were abandoned. And when the cadre camps were abandoned, then I think we lost many things. And due to lack of cadre camps, the message among the masses was also not going. So there has been a complete disconnect between the leader and the people. And I think that's where, if you see that how do we understand now in the present context. So I think the kind of strategies which Kanshiram adopted during those times, maybe the cycle rally, that could be kind of cadre camp, or also the kind of writings he was doing. It is not that he was not writing. These 12 volumes which Akela has written, these 12 volumes are certainly his own writings, which were available in the Bahujan Sangathak. So Bahujan Sangathak was there for a very, very long time. And which is known as Sampadakiya, those were written by Kanshiram Sahab. So it's not that he was not writing, he was writing. And that's where I think, sometimes I feel that, now there are so many educated, but so many educated are not able to do what some of the people like Ambedkar and Kanshiram could do. Maybe there are different kinds of limitations of each and every one, but I think the kind of vision, the kind of understanding which is required to lead a movement, that actually probably is not available now. Once, in fact, we used to organize something known as Dalit History Congress. I think 3 congresses were organized, and in each congress it was Manyawar Kanshiram who actually inaugurated those Dalit history congresses. And those history congresses actually would created some kind of understanding among the educated ones of those times. So I think it's not that the sources are not there, resources are not there, but I think there is something which is lacking among many of us, I would say, due to which probably the kind of things which some of those great people could do, we are not able to do. And that's where we need to understand that what is that, why we are not able to do that. And you being young, so it's not that I can go away without my responsibility, but the responsibility, I think, in the next 20 years or so is on you people, that how do you understand the movement and lead your own life. It's very, very personal also. It's not a collective kind of thing always. It's also personal. If you don't understand your own personal life properly, then I think making collectives is not possible. So to get some inspiration from the person like Kanshiram is something I would say would be a tribute to him. Thank you very much.